They told him it was not a bus ticket. They said it loud enough for strangers to hear, loud enough to stick. And in that moment, right there at the gate of JFK Terminal 4, something invisible but irreversible snapped into place. Margaret Collins did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her tone was sharp, clipped, practiced. The voice of someone who had learned that authority did not have to shout to cut. She stood perfectly straight behind the boarding podium, silk scarf pinned at her throat, posture rigid as if the airport itself answered to her spine. "First class is for people who actually matter," she said, eyes flicking past the young man in front of her as though he were luggage left in the aisle. The line froze. Wheels stopped rolling. Conversations thinned to whispers. Somewhere behind them, a coffee cup rattled against its saucer. Ethan Walker did not move. He stood with his boarding pass pinched between two fingers, knuckles pale, shoulders relaxed in a way that did not match the tension coiling through the air. He was 23, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a grey hoodie that had seen too many wash cycles, black athletic pants, and sneakers with creased leather and frayed laces. No jacket, no watch, no visible signs of money. Just a worn duffel bag slung low on one shoulder, and a pair of headphones resting around his neck like a habit he forgot to break. Margaret noticed all of it. She always did. She noticed everything that confirmed what she already believed. She did not look at the boarding pass. Instead, her gaze traveled slowly, deliberately, from his shoes to his hoodie, then to his face. Her lips pressed together. A short breath escaped her nose. Not quite a laugh, more like disbelief. "Sweetheart," she said, leaning slightly forward now, lowering her voice in a way that pretended to be kind. "Economy boarding is down at gate 45. This is the priority lane." Ethan met her eyes. They were calm. Not blank, not defiant. Calm in a way that unsettled people who expected either fear or anger. "I know," he said. His voice was deep, steady, unhurried. "I'm on this flight." Margaret rolled her eyes, the motion quick and performative, making sure the silver-haired man behind him saw it. She reached out and took the boarding pass between two manicured fingers, as if it were something dirty. "Let's see," she said, already shaking her head. In her mind, the story was finished. 42F, 55C. Something she could dismiss without effort. Her eyes dropped to the paper. Passenger, Ethan Walker. Seat 1A. Status V. IP. Priority override. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across her face. Not doubt, not fear. Annoyance, the kind that comes when reality does not cooperate. She laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that cut through the gate area. Heads turned. "That's funny," she said, tossing the boarding pass back towards him without looking. It fluttered, missed his hand, and landed face down on the polished floor. "Where did you get this? Print it yourself, or did you swipe it from someone who actually belongs here?" Ethan bent down and picked it up slowly. The movement was controlled, deliberate, as if he were aware that every gesture was being watched. When he stood again, His jaw was tight, not with rage, but with something quieter. Disappointment. "I bought the ticket," he said. "It's real. You can scan it." "I'm not scanning a fake ticket," Margaret snapped. Her smile vanished completely now, replaced by a flat, irritated stare. "And I'm not holding up my line for a prank." She lifted her hand and snapped her fingers once. A security officer, standing several yards away, shifted his weight, eyes already trained on Ethan. Margaret did not look at him. She did not have to. "We have a zero-tolerance policy for fraud," she said loudly. "You need to step away from the podium. Now." A murmur rippled through the line. Someone sighed. Someone else checked their watch. The silver-haired man adjusted his blazer, lips pursed, impatience etched into his face. "Check the system," Ethan said. His voice had not risen, but something in it had changed. It carried weight now. "Just type the name. Walker." Margaret leaned forward, lowering her voice again, this time sharp enough to draw blood. "Seat 1. Costs $20,000, she hissed. "You look like you couldn't afford the tax on a bag of peanuts. Move, or I call airport police." Behind Ethan, a woman in a beige trench coat shook her head, whispering to her husband. The silver-haired man cleared his throat loudly, a sound meant to remind everyone that his time was expensive. Margaret straightened, feeling validated. This was her role. Gatekeeper. Protector of the experience. She had spent 2 decades perfecting this instinct, learning to spot who belonged and who did not before the system ever had to decide. "Is there a problem?" a voice asked. It came from the jet bridge entrance. The silver-haired man had stopped walking, curiosity replacing irritation. His eyes moved between Margaret and Ethan, not hostile, just confused. "No problem at all, Mr. Harrison," Margaret said instantly, her smile snapping back into place like a mask. "Just a little misunderstanding. This young man seems to think casual wear qualifies him for the owner's suite." Ethan looked at her then, really looked at her. Something passed between them in that brief moment. It was not anger. It was recognition. The look of someone watching an opponent make a mistake they did not yet understand. "Fine," Ethan said. "I'll wait." "You won't wait here," Margaret replied, pointing toward the plastic chairs near the wall. "Sit over there. When I finish boarding actual passengers, I'll deal with you." He did not argue. He turned, walked to the chairs and sat down. The duffel bag rested at his feet. He pulled out his phone. His face was unreadable, but his fingers moved with quiet purpose. Margaret watched him for a second longer than necessary, then turned back to the line, already rewriting the story in her head. She had handled it. She always did. What she did not see was the message forming on Ethan's screen. What she did not hear was the soft exhale of a man who knew exactly how much power he carried and exactly when to use it. And somewhere far above the terminal glass, an entire fleet of aircraft moved through the sky, unaware that one gate, one sentence, and one moment of arrogance had just set something much larger in motion. The air inside Terminal 4 thickened as boarding continued. the kind of invisible pressure that built when people with money felt delayed by something they considered beneath them. Margaret Collins thrived in that pressure. It sharpened her. She moved with precision now, greeting familiar faces with curated warmth, her voice softening instantly when the platinum cards appeared, when tailored suits stepped forward, when last names carried weight. "Good afternoon, Mr. Whittaker," she said, smile polished, eyes bright. "Seat 2A is ready. Champagne is already chilled." Whittaker barely acknowledged her, already checking his phone. But Margaret absorbed the dismissal like fuel. She lived for proximity to importance, even when it did not look back. Behind her, the jet bridge hummed faintly. The aircraft door stood open like a promise. Soft amber light spilled from the first-class cabin, leather and wood and quiet money. Margaret felt it pulling at her spine, reminding her what she protected. She did not look toward the chairs, not yet. Ethan sat exactly where she had pointed him, back straight, legs stretched just enough to look comfortable, not sloppy. The duffel bag remained closed, zipped, untouched. His phone rested low in his hand, screen dimmed. Anyone watching casually would have seen nothing unusual. A kid killing time. Another delay. Another almost. But if someone had been close enough, they might have noticed the stillness in his breathing, the way his jaw tightened not with anger, but calculation, the way his thumb hovered for a beat before pressing send. Margaret continued boarding. A couple argued quietly about overhead bin space. A man in loafers complained about the temperature. A woman demanded to know why her seatmate had boarded before her. Margaret handled each interaction like a conductor, shaping chaos into something that resembled order. She felt powerful again. 20 minutes passed. First class filled. Business class followed. The gate area thinned until only echoes remained. The last boarding call chimed overhead, its cheerful tone clashing with the fatigue settling into the room. Margaret finally turned toward the chairs. Ethan was still there. She frowned, irritated by his persistence. The audacity of waiting, of not disappearing when dismissed. She walked toward him, heels clicking sharply against the terrazzo floor, a sound meant to announce authority. A junior gate agent, Chloe, shifted uncomfortably behind her. Chloe was young, early 30s, hair pulled back too tight, eyes alert in a way that suggested unease. "Margaret," she murmured, lowering her voice. "We should probably just scan it. If it clears, it clears." Margaret stopped, slowly turned. Her smile did not reach her eyes. "This is about principle," she said. "If we let people like him test boundaries, the whole system breaks." Chloe swallowed. "The flight closes in 5 minutes." Margaret nodded once, decisive. "Good. Then let's end it." She stopped in front of Ethan, standing just close enough to invade his space. "Last chance," she said. "Admit it's fake, and I let you walk away. Try to board, and I call airport police." Ethan stood. He was taller than she remembered. Close, his presence filled the space in a way that made Chloe instinctively take a step back. His eyes stayed on Margaret's face. Calm, steady. "Scan it." Margaret snatched the boarding pass from his hand, fingers tight around the paper as if it might contaminate her. She turned and marched back to the podium. Her movements were sharp now, brittle at the edges. She slid the pass under the scanner, already preparing her expression for vindication. The machine beeped. Green. A crisp chime followed. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Walker." The sound cut through the gate like glass breaking. Margaret froze. She stared at the screen, blinked, leaned closer. The status line glowed back at her, unambiguous. "Priority override. Authorized." Chloe inhaled sharply. "It cleared," she whispered. "Margaret, we have to let him board." Heat crept up Margaret's neck, flushing her skin beneath the scarf. The story she had been telling herself began to splinter, but she clung to it with practiced force. "Systems glitch," she snapped. "Happens all the time." She shoved the boarding pass into Ethan's chest, not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to assert dominance. "Fine. Board. But don't think for 1 second you're getting special treatment. I'll be watching you." Ethan took the pass without comment and walked toward the jet bridge. The moment he crossed the threshold, the atmosphere shifted. Inside the aircraft, the air was cooler, quieter. Jazz played softly from hidden speakers. A flight attendant smiled automatically as he passed, then hesitated, her eyes flicking toward Margaret behind him. Margaret moved faster now, slipping past Ethan, stepping into the aisle ahead of him. She raised one hand, palm out. "No," she said. Ethan stopped. "That seat is not available," Margaret continued, her voice low, controlled. "Seat 1A is reserved." "My ticket says 1A, Ethan replied. "I don't care what your ticket says," Margaret said. Her heart beat faster now, but she pushed through it. "That seat is for a diplomat arriving late. You'll sit in the jump seat in the galley. Or you can get off this plane." The words landed heavy. Nearby passengers paused, eyes lifting from newspapers and screens. A man in seat 2. A glanced up, curiosity sharpening his features. Ethan looked past Margaret, toward the empty pod of seat 1A, plush leather. Wide window, untouched. Then he looked at the narrow fold-down jump seat near the lavatory. Metal frame, exposed straps. No privacy. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "Okay," he said. "I'll take the jump seat. But I need your name." Margaret smiled, sharp and satisfied. She tapped her gold name badge with one finger. "Margaret Collins. Make sure you spell it right." Ethan nodded and sat. The harness clicked into place around his chest, the sound loud in the quiet galley. He looked absurd there, knees angled awkwardly, shoulders brushing metal. A first-class cabin full of luxury sat 10 feet away, untouched. Passengers noticed. "Excuse me," the man in seat 2A said, lowering his newspaper. "Is there a reason that young man isn't in his seat?" 1A is empty." Margaret leaned in, voice conspiratorial. "Security concern, sir. We believe the ticket may be fraudulent, but we didn't want to delay departure." The man frowned but said nothing. Margaret turned away, satisfied, and began her final checks. As she passed the galley, She nudged Ethan's duffel bag farther under the seat with her foot. "Comfortable?" she muttered. Ethan did not look up. His phone screen glowed faintly. At the top, a single contact name. Dad. The message was brief, precise, sent without hesitation. The aircraft pushed back. The safety demonstration began. Margaret took her position in the aisle, chin lifted, posture flawless. She felt in control again. She did not see Ethan smile. She did not hear the engine spool unevenly as the aircraft taxied toward the runway. And she did not yet know that somewhere far beyond the terminal, a phone had just been picked up and a decision had already been made. The engine surged, a deep metallic roar that pressed bodies into leather and fabric, a sound that usually meant inevitability, acceleration, commitment. Margaret Collins closed her eyes for half a second, savoring it. This was the moment she loved most, when a cabin fell into obedience and the outside world receded, when everything moved because she allowed it to. Then the sound changed. Not a bang, not an alarm, just a subtle thinning of power, like a breath caught mid-inhale. The thrust faltered. The vibration shifted underfoot. Margaret's eyes snapped open as the aircraft lurched forward and then abruptly slowed. The brakes engaged hard, violent enough to jolt her against the harness. A sharp gasp rippled through the cabin, champagne flutes rattling, hands gripping armrests. The roar died into a strained whine. Silence followed. Heavy. Unnatural. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice came over the intercom. Tight, controlled, and unmistakably angry. "This is Captain Reynolds. We are aborting takeoff. Please remain seated." Margaret's brow furrowed. Aborted takeoffs did not happen casually. She unbuckled the moment the fasten seatbelt sign chimed off, even though the plane was still rolling. She stood, smoothing her skirt with sharp, irritated movements, already assembling the narrative in her head. Security concern. Protocol. She had flagged it. Of course, the cockpit would listen to her. She glanced down at Ethan. He sat strapped into the jump seat, shoulders relaxed, head tilted slightly as if listening to something only he could hear. He was calm in a way that felt wrong. Too calm. His phone rested in his hand now, screen dark. He was not pretending anymore. He was waiting. The aircraft turned off the runway, tires humming against concrete as they taxied back. The first-class cabin buzzed with agitation. Voices rose. Complaints layered over one another. "This is unacceptable. I have a connection. I paid for priority." Margaret stepped into the aisle, slipping into damage control. "We're addressing a safety issue," she said softly, her voice carrying just enough authority to soothe without explaining. "We'll be back on our way shortly." She leaned toward Ethan as she passed him, her perfume sharp in the confined space. "I hope you have a good lawyer," she whispered. "Disrupting a flight crew is a federal offense." Ethan looked up at her then. His eyes were steady, unmoved. "I didn't disrupt anyone," he said quietly. "I sat where you told me to sit." Margaret scoffed and turned away, irritation flaring hot and fast. She marched into first class, where frustration had curdled into anger. A woman draped in diamonds slammed her glass onto the tray table. "Why are we turning around?" I have dinner plans in London. Margaret's expression softened into practiced sympathy. I'm so sorry, ma'am. It's the situation in the galley. The young man I tried to stop at the gate. He slipped through with a counterfeit ticket. The captain doesn't feel comfortable crossing the Atlantic with him on board. Murmurs surged. Heads shook. A few passengers glanced toward the front, disgust plain on their faces. I knew it, a man said. You could tell just by looking at him. Margaret nodded, playing the martyr. Regulations tie our hands, but don't worry. Authorities will meet us at the gate. Back in the galley, Chloe stood pale, clutching the interphone. Margaret, she whispered, I just spoke to the cockpit. Margaret grabbed a bottle of water, unscrewing the cap with sharp twists. Is the captain furious? He asked if the passenger in seat 1A was comfortable. Margaret froze. What? He asked if Mr. Walker was comfortable. Chloe repeated, voice trembling. I told him you put him in the jump seat. There was a pause. Chloe swallowed. Then he hung up. Margaret waved her off, though her hand shook slightly. He's stressed. He thinks we're monitoring him. The plane came to a stop at the gate. Not just any gate. Gate 42. The main heavy lift gate. Through the window, Margaret saw the jet bridge rolling toward them, and beyond it, 3 black SUVs parked close to the aircraft. No police cars, no flashing lights. She smiled thinly and turned toward Ethan. Looks like they brought federal security. Ethan stood, unbuckling with unhurried precision. He picked up his duffel bag, filling the small galley with his presence. Margaret, he said, his voice lower now, older. You have a bad habit of judging people by their cover. She snapped, Sit down. You don't move until they tell you. The door disarmed with a heavy clunk. Margaret positioned herself directly in front of it, smoothing her hair, ready. She rehearsed her words. Aggressive, non-compliant, threatening. The door opened. A man stepped inside wearing a charcoal suit, tailored to perfection. Early 60s, silver hair, eyes like cut stone. He did not look at Margaret. Behind him stood 2 others, one holding a tablet, another a leather briefcase. And behind them, the station manager, face drained of color. Margaret's breath caught. She knew that man. Everyone did. The suited man moved past her without a glance, his focus locking onto Ethan. The cabin fell into a stunned hush. Mr. Walker, the man said, bowing his head slightly. On behalf of Aurora Crown, I apologize. Margaret felt the blood leave her face. Her knees weakened. Ethan did not bow back. My father tells me you run a tight operation, he said evenly. Today, it didn't feel that way. We are investigating immediately, the man replied. Your father is on a secure line in the cockpit. My father? Margaret whispered. The man finally turned toward her. His gaze was cold. Senior Purser. Margaret Collins, he said. Do you know who this is? She shook her head, unable to speak. This is Ethan Walker, he announced, voice carrying into first class. The son of our founder, the majority shareholder of this airline. A collective inhale swept the cabin. Ethan stepped closer to Margaret. "I told you my name," he said quietly. "You laughed because of how I looked." The captain emerged from the cockpit, eyes burning. "When I learned where you were seated," he said to Ethan, "I turned the plane around. I will not fly the owner's son like cargo." Margaret's mouth opened. "I didn't know." "He looked like what?" Ethan asked. She couldn't answer. "I want my seat," Ethan said, turning away from her. "And I don't want to fly with her." The suited man nodded once. "Margaret Collins, hand over your badge." A new crew appeared at the rear door, uniforms crisp, faces composed. Margaret stared at the passengers she had courted, their eyes now filled with something else. Disgust. Judgment. She unpinned her wings with shaking hands and walked toward the exit as applause followed her down the aisle. The applause followed her into the jet bridge like a physical force, a sound that pressed against Margaret Collins's back and refused to let go. It was not thunderous. It was worse, measured, deliberate, the kind of applause that meant judgment, not celebration. She kept walking, heels striking metal too loud, too fast, each step stripping something away. The jet bridge felt longer than it ever had. The glass walls reflected her in fragments. A woman with mascara running, a silk scarf twisted out of place. Gold wings no longer pinned to her chest. She did not look like authority anymore. She looked exposed. At the end of the bridge, the terminal opened up into noise and motion. Terminal 4 did not pause for fallen people. Bags rolled. Announcements echoed. Screens flickered with departures and delays. Life moved on without noticing her. Margaret stepped onto the carpet and slowed, suddenly aware of eyes on her. Not the admiring glances she had grown used to. These were sharp, curious, recognizing. A teenager near the gate nudged his friend. "That's her," he said, not quietly. "From the video." Margaret's stomach dropped. Video. The word landed heavy, sinking deep. She reached into her purse for her phone, fingers trembling. The screen lit up and then blurred as notifications stacked faster than she could read them. Missed calls, messages from numbers she did not recognize, alerts from platforms she rarely used, now screaming for her attention. She tapped one link. The video loaded instantly. High definition, steady framing, her voice clear, her laugh unmistakable. "You look like you couldn't afford the tax on a bag of peanuts." The boarding pass fluttering to the floor. Ethan standing still. Calm, dignified. The clip cut to another angle. Inside the aircraft, her body blocking the aisle, her finger pointing. "You're not sitting there." Margaret's breath shortened. Her hands went cold. The view count climbed as she watched. Hundreds of thousands. Then more. Comments scrolled faster than she could process. She stumbled into the nearest restroom and locked herself into a stall. The space smelled of disinfectant and perfume. She sat on the closed toilet lid, elbows on knees, phone shaking in her hands. They edited it, she told herself. Out of context. They didn't see everything. She opened her social media app and began typing, fingers moving with desperate speed. Today I was terminated for doing my job. I was protecting passengers from a security threat. She hit post. The response was immediate. Brutal. He handed you his ticket. You threw it on the floor. Stop lying. We saw the whole thing. Her phone buzzed again. A call. She recognized the number. Carl, the union representative. Carl, she said, voice cracking with relief. Thank God. They fired me without a hearing. That's a violation. We need to file a grievance. There was a pause on the line. Long. Heavy. I've seen the video, Carl said finally. His voice was cold. I spoke to the captain. I spoke to corporate. It's edited, Margaret insisted. They're twisting it. Stop, Carl snapped. You violated civil rights policy, passenger bill of rights, multiple company protocols. You profiled a passenger. You ignored a valid boarding pass. I'm a dues-paying member, she shouted. You have to defend me. This wasn't unjust termination, Carl replied. Aurora Crown issued a statement. They're calling your actions rogue behavior. We can't touch this. The line went dead. Margaret stared at her phone as if it might speak again. It did not. 3 weeks later, her apartment was dark, curtains drawn, the air stale. Unopened mail piled on the counter. Pizza boxes stacked like evidence. She had not left in days. Rejection emails filled her inbox. Aurora Pacific, SkyWest, charter lines, cargo operators, even a regional outfit in Alaska. All the same response. Thank you for your interest. We will not be moving forward. Her name was flagged. Gross misconduct. High liability. She paced the living room, anger replacing fear. She found a lawyer. Saul Becker. Strip mall office. Cheap coffee. Promises spoken too easily. They'll settle, he said. Rich companies hate bad press. The countersuit arrived a week later. Fuel dump costs, runway penalties, passenger compensation vouchers, crew replacement logistics, total damages, $1.6 million. Margaret's vision tunneled as Saul read it aloud. They're freezing your assets, he said quietly. Effective immediately. She drove home in silence. The tow truck was already there. Her Mercedes sat half-lifted, chains locked tight. Repo order, the driver said without looking at her. Bank recalled the loan. You can't, she said. I need my car. He shrugged. Not my problem. She stood on the sidewalk as it disappeared down the street. Her phone battery died in her hand. She looked around. 10 miles from home. No money she could access. No ride. Across the street, a city bus hissed to a stop. The sign read, Downtown. The memory hit her like a punch. This isn't a bus ticket. She crossed the street and climbed aboard, heels awkward on metal steps. Exact change only, the driver muttered. She fed a crumpled $5 bill into the machine. No change. The bus lurched forward. She stood gripping a greasy rail as buildings slid past the window. Overhead, a plane streaked across the sky, silver and distant. 1 year later, the Greyhound terminal in Newark smelled of diesel and stale popcorn. Margaret sat behind scratched plexiglass, wearing a polyester uniform 2 sizes too big. Her name tag read simply, M. Collins. "Next," she called, voice hoarse. A young man stepped up, hoodie zipped halfway, headphones around his neck. He slid cash onto the counter. 1 ticket to D.C. Margaret took a breath. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't sigh. "Of course," she said softly. "That'll be $28. As she printed the ticket, the television in the break room behind her flickered to life. A news anchor spoke about Aurora Crown's record profits. The screen cut to a podium. Ethan Walker stood there in a tailored suit, vintage sneakers still on his feet. "A year ago," he said, "I was told I didn't belong. I was judged for how I looked." Margaret watched, hands still. The bus ticket slid under the glass. She looked at her reflection, and for the first time, she did not look away. The terminal never slept, but at that hour it felt exhausted, like a body forced to stay upright long after the mind had given up. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flattening every color, every face, every mood into the same tired shade of gray. Margaret Collins sat behind the scratched plexiglass window, hands folded on the counter, waiting for the next person to step forward. The young man with the hoodie was gone now. The line moved on. It always did. She stared at the computer screen, its ancient interface blinking patiently, as if it had all the time in the world. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, slow, deliberate. She typed each letter carefully. No mistakes allowed. Mistakes were no longer forgiven. Behind her, the small television mounted in the corner of the break room continued its loop. Business news. Stock tickers crawling along the bottom of the screen. Words like growth, expansion, record quarter, market confidence. She tried not to listen, but sound had a way of slipping through cracks in resolve. And in other news, the anchor said, voice crisp, energetic, untouched by the fatigue of the terminal, Aurora Crown Airlines has announced the expansion of its Open Sky initiative, pledging an additional $50 million toward diversity training and flight scholarships nationwide. Margaret's jaw tightened. She did not turn around. She already knew who would appear next. The camera cut to a wide shot of a stage, washed in white light. A podium, a logo she used to wear on her chest with pride. And then Ethan Walker stepped into frame. He looked different, not richer, not louder, just more defined. The suit fit him cleanly, dark fabric tailored without excess. His hair was neatly trimmed. His posture was relaxed, confident without performance. On his feet, unmistakable even from a distance, were the same worn vintage sneakers. Margaret felt a dull ache settle behind her eyes. 1 year ago, Ethan said, his voice steady, amplified through speakers far more expensive than anything in the bus terminal, I boarded a flight I paid for, and I was told I didn't belong. The camera panned briefly to the audience. Executives, employees, applause waiting on cue. I wasn't loud, he continued. I wasn't disruptive. I didn't demand anything extra. I just existed in a space that someone else had decided wasn't meant for me. Margaret's fingers curled slightly against the counter. She remembered the exact cadence of his voice when he stood at the gate. Calm, controlled, unyielding. She had mistaken it for weakness, or worse, entitlement. That moment, Ethan said, wasn't unique. It was just visible. The anchor nodded solemnly as the speech continued, but Margaret had stopped listening to the commentary. Her attention locked onto Ethan's face, the way his eyes moved across the room, not accusing, not triumphant, but focused, purposeful. She thought of the jump seat, the harness clicking shut, the way she had nudged his bag with her foot. A laugh rose in her throat, sharp and bitter, but she swallowed it back. A door banged open somewhere down the hall. Voices echoed. Someone complained loudly about a delayed bus. Someone else cursed under their breath. The terminal breathed in frustration and breathed it back out again. Next, Margaret called, voice flat. A woman stepped forward, mid-40s, tired eyes, heavy purse slung over one shoulder. She slapped cash on the counter. "One way to Philly," she said. "And don't take all day." Margaret met her gaze. There it was. That familiar flicker. The assessment, the judgment. The same instinct she had trusted for decades. She felt it rise. And then she felt something else. The woman's hands trembled slightly as she gathered her change. Her shoes were scuffed. Her coat smelled faintly of rain. Margaret noticed these details now, not as evidence of worth, but as facts. Just facts. "That'll be $30, Margaret said quietly. The woman rolled her eyes but counted out the bills. Figures. Margaret printed the ticket and slid it under the glass. "Gate 7, she said. "Boarding in about 20 minutes. The woman hesitated, then nodded once. "Thanks." Margaret watched her walk away. On the television, Ethan's speech continued. "We're retiring the old priority boarding system," he said. "Not because efficiency doesn't matter, but because dignity matters more. At 30,000 feet, we're all just people trying to get somewhere." Applause filled the screen. Margaret closed her eyes. She remembered the feel of the silk scarf at her throat, the weight of the gold wings pinned to her chest, the way people used to look at her when she stood at the gate. How quickly she had come to believe that look meant something permanent. The break room door creaked open. Rick, her manager, leaned in, chewing on a toothpick. "Break's over," he said. "Bus from Baltimore just pulled in. It's packed." Margaret nodded. "I'll be right there." Rick lingered a moment, eyes flicking to the television. "You watching that airline kid again?" She did not answer. Rick shrugged. Clock's ticking. She returned to her booth. The line had grown again. Faces blurred together. Hoodies, headphones, worn bags. The same silhouettes she once filtered without thought. A young man stepped up next. Early 20s. Nervous energy. He kept glancing at his phone, thumb tapping anxiously against the screen. "Ticket to Richmond," he said. "I'm late." Margaret inhaled slowly. She reached for the keyboard. "Let's see what we can do." As she typed, the young man looked up at her. Really looked. His eyes lingered, curious. "Rough job, huh?" Margaret paused. She could have snapped. She could have corrected him. She could have reminded him of who she used to be. Instead, she nodded. Some days. He smiled, small and tired. Thanks for helping. The printer whirred. The ticket slid forward. Margaret handed it to him through the slot. Have a safe trip, she said. The words felt strange in her mouth. Not rehearsed, not required. Chosen. The young man walked away, shoulders relaxing slightly as he did. Margaret glanced back at the television, just as the anchor wrapped up the segment. Ethan stood beside his father now, the older man's hand resting briefly on his shoulder. Pride. Trust, legacy. The screen cut to commercial. The terminal noise rushed back in. Margaret straightened in her chair. The next customer stepped forward. For the first time in a long while, she did not feel the urge to decide who deserved to be there. She just did the job. And somewhere, far above the ceiling of the bus terminal, planes continued to rise, carrying people who would never know her name, or the lesson she learned too late, but would still benefit from it, all the same. The night shift bled into morning without ceremony, the terminal changing its mood the way a city changes weather. The crowd thinned, then thickened again. Different faces, same fatigue. Margaret Collins remained behind the glass, posture steady, movements economical, as if conserving something she could not afford to lose. A janitor pushed a mop past her booth, the smell of disinfectant sharp and clean. Over the intercom, a voice announced delays with artificial cheer. Outside the high windows, dawn crept up the sides of buildings, turning the sky a dull, exhausted blue. Margaret watched it all with a strange detachment, as if she were no longer fully inside her own life. At 5:45 in the morning, her phone vibrated in her pocket. She ignored it. Phones brought nothing good anymore. But it vibrated again, then again. Reluctantly, she pulled it out. Unknown number. She let it ring once more, then answered. Hello. Margaret Collins, a man said. His voice was calm, professional, unhurried, the kind of voice that never had to ask twice. This is David Harmon from Aurora Crown, legal. Her stomach tightened. She said nothing. We've been trying to reach you, he continued. I'll be brief. The company's internal review is complete. In light of the footage, witness statements, and your prior complaint history, Aurora Crown is proceeding with full civil recovery. Margaret closed her eyes. I've already lost everything. That's not the company's concern, Harmon replied evenly. This call is a courtesy. You'll be served formally within 48 hours. I suggest you consult counsel. The line went dead. Margaret stared at the dark screen, then slid the phone back into her pocket, as if it were something dangerous. A man stepped up to the booth, snapping her back into place. Mid-30s, wrinkled suit, red eyes. He smelled like stale coffee and panic. Is the 6:15 still boarding? He asked. She checked the screen. Delayed, she said. 20 minutes. He exhaled sharply. Of course it is. Margaret nodded once. I'm sorry. He looked at her then, really looked. You sound like you mean that. She did not respond. The line moved. The rhythm returned. The work swallowed her, and for a while, that was enough. But the day did not let her hide for long. During her lunch break, she sat alone at a plastic table, unwrapping a sandwich she barely tasted. The television flickered again, this time to a panel discussion. Ethan Walker sat at a long desk beside a senator, a labor advocate, and an aviation analyst. The banner beneath them read, "Accountability in Modern Air Travel." Margaret's jaw tightened. "Power," Ethan was saying, "is most dangerous when it feels invisible, when people think no one is watching." The host nodded. "Are you saying this is systemic?" Ethan did not hesitate. "Yes. And pretending it isn't only protects it." Margaret pushed the sandwich away. A memory surfaced uninvited. Her first year as a flight attendant. Younger. Hungrier. How she had watched senior crew members decide who mattered with a glance. How she had learned quickly. How it had felt like survival, not cruelty. She stood and threw the rest of her lunch away. That afternoon, Rick called her into his office. The space was small, cluttered, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "You've been distracted." She met his gaze. "I'm doing my job." He snorted. "Everyone's replaceable, Margaret. Don't forget that." The words landed harder than he intended. Or maybe exactly as hard. "I won't," she said. He waved her off. "Get back out there." As she returned to her booth, the terminal filled again. Afternoon rush. Families. College kids. Workers heading home. The same humanity she once filtered and ranked now flowed past her unchecked. A woman with a stroller struggled to balance a toddler and a bag. Margaret stood without thinking, opening the side gate and stepping around the glass. "Here," she said, lifting the bag gently. "Let me help." The woman blinked, surprised. "Thank you." Margaret nodded and returned to her seat. Rick watched from across the terminal, frowning slightly but said nothing. Small things, unnoticed things. They began to add up. Weeks passed. The lawsuit arrived. Thick envelope, heavy language, numbers she could not fathom. She signed where instructed, hands steady, despite the tremor in her chest. The city felt smaller now, louder, less forgiving. She sold what little she could, cut costs, learned the weight of every dollar. And still, every morning, she came back to the booth. One evening, as rain streaked the windows and the terminal echoed with thunder, a familiar face appeared in line. Chloe. Margaret's breath caught. Chloe stood taller now, hair looser. Confidence settled into her posture. A gold wing pin gleamed on her jacket. They locked eyes. They locked. Chloe hesitated, then stepped forward. "Margaret." Margaret swallowed. "Chloe." "I wasn't sure it was you," Chloe said quietly. Margaret nodded. "I look different?" Chloe glanced around, then back at her. "I got promoted," she said, almost apologetic. "I saw," Margaret replied. And she had. On the screen. Smiling. Applauded. Chloe shifted her weight. "I tried to warn you." I know. A beat passed between them, heavy with things neither could undo. I hope you're okay, Chloe said finally. Margaret considered the question. The truth was complicated. I'm learning, she said. Chloe nodded once. Take care of yourself. She stepped away, disappearing into the crowd. Margaret watched her go, then turned back to the screen. Another customer. Another ticket. Another small act done without spectacle. That night, as she locked her booth and walked toward the exit, she passed a group of teenagers laughing loudly, backpacks slung low, faces bright with possibility. One of them bumped into her by accident. Oh, sorry, he said quickly. Margaret smiled faintly. You're fine. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled clean. She stood for a moment beneath the terminal lights, listening to planes lift into the dark, each one carrying people who would never know how close they had come to being misjudged, or how easily it could have happened. Margaret pulled her coat tighter and started the long walk to the bus stop, footsteps steady, pace unhurried, no longer trying to outrun what she had become, or what she still might be. Winter came early that year, settling into the city with a weight that felt personal. The bus terminal grew colder despite the heaters, drafts slipping through cracks in the glass, finding their way into bones and memory. Margaret Collins learned the rhythm of it, the way cold, sharpened voices and shortened patience. She arrived before sunrise now, breath visible as she waited outside for the doors to unlock. The security guard nodded at her without recognition. She nodded back. Familiarity without names. It suited her. Inside, the terminal woke slowly. Screens flickered on. Coffee machines hissed. The first wave of travelers drifted in, bundled in coats, dragging lives behind them on wheels. Margaret took her seat behind the glass and logged in, the system greeting her without warmth or judgment. One morning, a man in his late 60s stepped up to the booth. Grey beard, wool coat worn thin at the cuffs. He held exact change in his palm like it mattered. Atlantic City, he said. His voice was tired but polite. Margaret typed. One way? He nodded. Going to see my sister. She's not well. She paused, then looked up. I hope she feels better. He blinked, surprised, then smiled faintly. Thank you. As he walked away, Margaret felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief. Recognition. These moments did not erase the past, but they pressed against it, quietly, persistently. Later that afternoon, the television returned to Ethan Walker. This time, he stood in a hangar, surrounded by aircraft noses, gleaming under industrial lights. The caption read, New training standards rolled out nationwide. Authority without accountability, Ethan said to the cameras, is just permission to harm. We're changing that. Margaret watched until Rick snapped the television off. Enough with that guy, he muttered. Back to work. She did not argue. The lawsuit moved forward. Depositions, documents, words like negligence and malice printed in black ink. She answered questions carefully, truthfully. There was no defense left to perform. Only facts. At night, she dreamed of the gate. the sound of the scanner, the green light she had refused to accept. She woke before dawn, heart racing, then lay still until the feeling passed. One evening, as snow fell thick outside, a woman approached the booth holding a phone up uncertainly. "Excuse me," she said. Were you? Margaret's stomach tightened. She nodded once. Yes. The woman hesitated. "I saw the video." Margaret waited. "I just wanted to say," the woman continued, voice low, "I was on a flight years ago where something like that happened to me. Different airline, different crew, but the same feeling." She swallowed. "It stayed with me." Margaret's throat tightened. "I'm sorry," she said. The woman studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I believe you are." She turned and walked away. Margaret sat very still. Weeks later, a letter arrived bearing the court seal. The ruling was final. Aurora Crown prevailed. Damages assessed, her accounts drained to fractions, bankruptcy filed. The word tasted bitter. Final. She took the bus home that night, snow crunching underfoot as she walked the last block. Her apartment felt smaller, quieter. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall until darkness settled. In the spring, the terminal buzzed with news of record travel numbers. People smiled more, planned more. The world felt eager again. Margaret noticed she smiled back now, not automatically, intentionally. One afternoon, a group of college students crowded the booth, laughing loudly, arguing over destinations. One of them rolled his eyes and said, "Man, we're never gonna make it." Margaret leaned forward slightly. "You will," she said. "Bus leaves in 10. They looked at her, surprised, then grinned. "Thanks." She printed their tickets, sliding them under the glass. "Have fun," she added. They did. That summer, the terminal hosted a job fair. Posters went up. Rick scoffed. "Waste of time," he said. "No one sticks around anyway." Margaret watched people wander through, hopeful, nervous. She thought of the first time she wore the uniform. The pride, the hunger, the moment she decided power meant distance. A young woman approached her booth during a lull, early 20s, nervous smile. "Can I ask you something?" Margaret nodded. "Is it hard?" the woman asked. "Dealing with people all day?" Margaret considered. "It's hard when you forget they're people." The woman smiled, relieved. "Thank you." That night, Margaret stood outside the terminal and watched a plane lift into the sky, its lights blinking against the dark. She imagined Ethan Walker, somewhere inside an office, signing policies, shaking hands, reshaping something larger than either of them. She did not hate him. She did not envy him. He had been a mirror she could not escape. Autumn returned. Leaves gathered along the curb. Margaret's routine held. Work, bus, home, repeat. One morning, Rick didn't show up. A new supervisor took his place. Younger, quieter. She watched Margaret carefully at first, then relaxed. "You're good with people. the supervisor said one day. "They trust you." Margaret nodded. "I try." Trust. The word felt earned now. On the anniversary of the flight, the television ran a brief segment. A year since the incident that changed Aurora Crown. Footage flashed. Ethan speaking. Chloe smiling in uniform. The company logo gleaming. Margaret did not look away. When the segment ended, the terminal noise rushed back in. Life resumed. A man stepped up to the booth wearing a hoodie and headphones. He placed his cash down and waited, eyes tired. Margaret met his gaze. "Where are you headed?" He blinked. "Chicago." She typed, printed, slid the ticket forward. "Safe trip." He nodded, surprised, then smiled. As he walked away, Margaret felt the familiar ache of regret, but it no longer consumed her. It coexisted with something else now. Responsibility, awareness, a quiet, steady resolve. Outside, a bus pulled away from the curb, exhaust rising into the air. Margaret watched it go, then turned back to her screen as the next customer stepped forward. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped beneath Margaret Collins's apartment door, sometime between the early bus rumble and the neighbor's radio bleeding through the wall. It was thick, cream-colored, heavier than paper had any right to be. She recognized the return address before she picked it up. Aurora Crown Airlines. She stood there for a long moment, coat still on, keys cold in her hand, staring at her own name printed cleanly on the front. No anger surged this time. No panic. Just a slow, measured tightening in her chest, like weather moving in. Inside, the apartment was quiet. She placed the envelope on the kitchen table, sat down, and opened it with deliberate care. The letter was formal, precise, stripped of emotion. It confirmed what she already knew but needed to see in ink. The final judgment, the remaining balance after liquidation, the terms of repayment, the reminder that the matter was now closed. Closed. The word echoed. She folded the letter neatly and placed it back into the envelope. There was no shock left to absorb, no denial to cling to, only the weight of consequence, settled and immovable. At work that day, the terminal hummed with its usual indifference. People complained about prices, schedules, weather. Margaret listened. She always listened now. Not because she had to, but because she could. Mid-morning, a man approached the booth with a familiar posture, straight-backed, expensive coat, the kind of confidence that assumed cooperation. He tapped the glass lightly, impatient. "Excuse me," he said. "I've been waiting." Margaret met his eyes. "I'll be right with you." He frowned, unused to being delayed by someone who did not apologize. She finished with the customer in front of him, then turned back. "Where are you headed?" He hesitated, then answered. "Boston." She processed the ticket without haste. When she slid it under the glass, he looked at her more closely. "You're very calm," he said, as if it were an accusation. Margaret nodded. "So are you." He scoffed, took the ticket, and walked away. But his steps slowed after a few paces, as if something about the exchange had unsettled him. Margaret returned her attention to the screen. That afternoon, the television in the break room showed a wide shot of a conference hall. Banners read, "Industry Reform Summit." Ethan Walker stood at the podium again, older somehow than a year ago, not in age but in presence. The audience leaned in when he spoke. "We don't fix culture by replacing faces," he said. "We fix it by replacing incentives." Margaret watched from the doorway, unseen. "We trained people to protect hierarchy," Ethan continued. "Now we're training them to protect humanity." A question followed from the audience. "Do you believe accountability should include second chances?" Ethan paused. The room stilled. "Yes," he said finally. "But accountability without consequence is meaningless, and consequence without reflection changes nothing." Margaret turned away before the segment ended. That night, she walked home instead of taking the bus, the city air cool against her face. Streetlights flickered on one by one, illuminating sidewalks cracked with years of use. She passed people who did not look at her. That anonymity no longer felt like erasure. It felt honest. At her apartment, she sat by the window and watched traffic move below. Headlights, brake lights, endless motion. She thought of the jump seat again. The harness. The way she had believed control meant elevation. She slept without dreams. Days passed, then weeks. The rhythm held. Work, walk, home, quiet. The lawsuit no longer loomed. It existed, resolved, like a scar she did not hide. One evening, as rain streaked the glass and thunder rolled distantly, a familiar voice cut through the terminal noise. "Margaret?" She turned. It was Ethan Walker. Not on a screen, not at a podium. Standing 10 feet away, hands in the pockets of a dark coat, hair damp from the rain. No entourage, no cameras. Just him. The terminal seemed to shrink around them. She did not stand. She did not flee. She met his gaze, heart steady. "Yes." He nodded once, acknowledging the truth of it. "I didn't expect you to be here." "I work here," she replied. "I know," he said. "I asked." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. "I'm not here to reopen anything," Ethan said. "I'm passing through. I wanted to see this place." Margaret gestured vaguely. "It's not much." He looked around. The flickering lights, the tired travelers, the hum of waiting. "It's honest." She considered that. "So is flying economy," she said quietly. A corner of his mouth lifted. Not a smile. Recognition. "I owe you nothing," he said. "And you owe me nothing." "I know." Another pause. People moved around them, unaware they were walking through the aftermath of something larger. "I've been thinking about power," Ethan said. "What it does to people. What it hides." Margaret's voice was calm when she answered. "Power doesn't change people. It just removes consequences long enough for them to forget." Ethan studied her. "Do you believe people can change?" She looked past him, toward the doors, where rain blurred the city beyond. "I believe they can learn. Change is harder." He nodded slowly. "That's fair." A boarding announcement echoed overhead. Ethan glanced at the screen. "That's me." Margaret processed his ticket without asking. Old habits did not die. They evolved. She slid the printed pass under the glass. "Safe trip." He took it, fingers brushing the edge for just a moment. "Thank you." As he turned to leave, she spoke again. "Ethan." He looked back. She did not apologize. Not again. She did not explain. She said only, "Don't let them forget." He held her gaze, then nodded. "I won't." He disappeared into the crowd. Margaret sat back in her chair, pulse steady, mind clear. Outside, the rain eased. A bus pulled away from the curb. Another arrived to take its place. The terminal continued its endless cycle of departure and return, carrying people forward whether they were ready or not. Margaret logged out at the end of her shift, gathered her coat, and stepped into the evening air. The city breathed around her. Imperfect, unforgiving, alive. She walked toward home, not lighter, not redeemed, but grounded in something she had never truly held before. Awareness. The city learned her new routine before she did. The same streets, the same hour, the same quiet walk past storefronts that never noticed her absence from the sky. Margaret Collins moved through it without urgency now, no longer measuring herself against what she had been, only against what she chose to be next. Spring tipped into summer. Heat settled into the terminal, thick and unmoving. Tempers shortened. Patience thinned. Margaret noticed the shift before others did. She adjusted without comment, slowed her voice. Let silences breathe. People mirrored what they were given. One afternoon, a man slammed his palm against the glass. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "I've been standing here forever." Margaret looked up. His face was flushed. Sweat darkened the collar of his shirt. He was not angry at her. He was angry at a life that refused to move fast enough. "I see you," she said calmly. "I'll help you next." The man faltered, the fight draining from his posture. "Sorry," he muttered. "Long day." "I understand," she replied. He did not apologize again. He did not need to. Rick would have called it inefficiency. The new supervisor called it de-escalation. Margaret called it basic decency. Her name became familiar in a different way now. Not whispered, not searched. Passed quietly from traveler to traveler. The woman at window 3 is kind. She listens. She won't rush you if you don't rush her. Kind. The word still felt strange when applied to her. At night, she read. Not self-help, not apologies bound in paper. History. Ethics. Memoirs written by people who had once held power and lost it. She underlined sentences, not for wisdom, for warning. She stopped dreaming about the gate. The anniversary of the flight came and went without ceremony. No headlines this time. The world had moved on. It always did. Margaret noticed the relief she felt and did not judge it. One evening, as the terminal prepared to close, a commotion broke out near the entrance. Voices rose. A young man was arguing with security. Hoodie, backpack. Too loud, too animated. Margaret felt the old reflex stir, the instinct to categorize, to anticipate outcome before process. She stood before she thought better of it and walked toward the noise. "What's going on?" she asked. The guard looked at her, surprised. "He's refusing to leave. Says he missed his bus." The young man turned. His eyes were pool. Frantic. "They told me the wrong gate," he said. "I don't have money for another ticket." Margaret looked at the screen above the booth. The bus had departed 3 minutes earlier. She remembered the jump seat, the harness, the feeling of being trapped by someone else's decision. "Give me a minute," she said to the guard. Rick would have intervened once. The new supervisor watched from a distance. Margaret returned to her booth and checked the system. The next bus to the same destination left in 40 minutes. Seats available. She calculated the difference. Not money. Time. She looked back at the young man. "Come here." He approached cautiously. "I can rebook you," she said. "No fee." His shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you. Thank you so much." The guard frowned. "Policy, I know," Margaret said quietly. "I'll note it." The supervisor nodded from across the terminal. The young man clutched the new ticket like something fragile. "I won't forget this," he said. Margaret smiled faintly. "You don't have to." That night, she walked home slower than usual. The city felt less hostile. Or maybe she did. Weeks later, a letter arrived. Not from Aurora Crown, not from the court, from a non-profit aviation training program. They had received an anonymous donation earmarked for administrative support. They were hiring. Margaret read the letter twice. The role was modest, behind the scenes. No uniforms, no authority. Just systems. Process accountability. She folded the letter and placed it beside her bed. At work the next day, she handed in her notice. Rick barely looked up. "You sure?" "Yes." He shrugged. "People come and go." The new supervisor met her eyes. "You'll be missed." Margaret nodded. "Thank you." Her last shift passed quietly. She printed tickets, answered questions, helped where she could. No applause, no speeches. That was fine. When her shift ended, she logged out and stood for a moment behind the glass. The booth looked smaller from this side, less imposing, less important. She stepped away without ceremony. On her final walk out of the terminal, she paused by the doors and looked back. At the lines, the lights, the movement. All the places she had once believed defined her. Outside, the evening air was warm. The city moved, always moving. Her new office was smaller, quieter. Windowless, she learned the systems quickly. She asked questions. She listened. She did not rush to speak in rooms where power gathered. She noticed how often people did. One afternoon, during a meeting about funding allocation, a younger colleague spoke hesitantly, voice almost lost beneath louder opinions. Margaret watched the room ignore her. She waited. "Let her finish," Margaret said calmly. The room stilled. The young woman continued, steadier now. The idea held. It mattered. Afterward, the woman found her. "Thank you," she said. "No one ever does that." Margaret nodded. They should. News of Aurora Crown still crossed her screen sometimes. Ethan Walker's name appeared less often now. The reforms had settled into policy. The spectacle had ended. The work continued. Margaret respected that. One night, she stood at her window and watched planes cut across the sky, silent from that distance. She did not imagine herself on board. She did not feel left behind. She felt placed. Her life had narrowed in some ways, expanded in others. The hierarchy she once climbed no longer tempted her. She understood now what it had cost. Not everything could be undone. Some damage stayed, but not everything had to be repeated. As she turned away from the window and shut off the light, Margaret Collins did not feel redeemed. She felt responsible. And that, she had learned, was the beginning of something far more difficult than power. The morning light came softly through the narrow window of Margaret Collins's apartment, touching the edge of the desk where she now spent her days. No announcements, no boarding calls, just the quiet hum of a city waking up and the muted rhythm of work that no longer demanded authority to feel meaningful. She arrived early at the non-profit office, as she always did. The building was modest, tucked between a bakery and a hardware store, the kind of place people passed without noticing. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered on one by one, revealing desks scarred by years of use, bulletin boards crowded with handwritten notes, and a whiteboard filled with flight school schedules and scholarship names. Margaret set her bag down and powered on her computer. Emails waited. Questions, requests, problems that needed patience more than power. She rolled up her sleeves and began. A young applicant called mid-morning, voice shaking as he explained he was missing paperwork. He had grown up moving between homes. He did not have everything the system asked for. Margaret listened. She did not interrupt. She did not rush him toward failure. She worked through alternatives, one step at a time, until his breathing slowed and his voice steadied. When the call ended, she sat back and closed her eyes for a moment. Not from exhaustion, from recognition. This was the kind of moment that once would have irritated her, delayed her, challenged her sense of control. Now it anchored her. At lunch, she ate quietly at her desk, scrolling past headlines she no longer felt compelled to open. Aurora Crown appeared now and then. Another program launched. Another cohort announced. The company had moved on. So had she. In the afternoon, a meeting gathered in the small conference room. Donors, coordinators, former pilots volunteering their time. Voices overlapped. Opinions competed. Margaret listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, it was measured, clear, without performance. At one point, a disagreement stalled progress. Two people talked past each other, each certain they were right. Margaret waited until the tension peaked, then spoke calmly. "We're trying to solve the same problem from different angles." The room slowed. People listened. The conversation shifted. A solution emerged. No one applauded. No one needed to. That evening, she walked home as she often did, passing the bus stop where she once stood clutching a crumpled bill, watching her former life disappear down the street. The memory surfaced without pain now. Just context. A reminder. Across the street, a city bus pulled in. People boarded, hoodies, headphones, work boots, backpacks, lives in motion. Margaret watched them with a clarity she had not possessed before. No hierarchy, no filtering. Just people going somewhere. She unlocked her apartment door and stepped inside. The space was still small, still quiet. She turned on a lamp and set her bag down, the simple ritual grounding her. On the bookshelf by the window sat the envelope from the court, long since opened, its contents no longer heavy enough to avoid. Beside it were new things. A notebook filled with process improvements, a thank you card from a scholarship recipient, a photo sent by a young trainee standing beside a small aircraft, smiling like someone who had finally been seen. Margaret picked up the card and read it again. Not for validation, for perspective. Outside, the distant sound of an airplane crossed the sky. She looked up, tracking the blinking lights until they vanished into cloud. She did not feel pulled toward it. She felt connected to it in a quieter way, through the work that now happened far from the aisle, far from the podium, far from the moment she once believed defined her. Power, she had learned, was loud when it was insecure. True influence moved differently. It did not need an audience. It did not need to humiliate. It only needed to be exercised with care. She turned off the lamp and sat in the dim room for a moment longer, thinking of the people she had judged, the harm she could not undo, and the responsibility she now carried forward. The story of her fall had been public. The work of her rebuilding was not. That felt right. Somewhere across the city, buses continued to arrive and depart. Somewhere else, planes lifted off, filled with people who would never know her name, but would move through systems shaped, in small part, by lessons learned the hard way. Margaret Collins stood, closed the blinds, and prepared for another day. Not redeemed, not forgotten, just changed. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to like the video so it can reach others. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about power, accountability, and human consequence. And if you want to be part of the conversation, leave a comment with 3 simple words. Choose better daily.